Hello and welcome back. We're discussing the humanitarian disaster in Myanmar and the slow response to international aid. With us in New York, John Holmes, in Washington, Beau Schlantin, and in London, Marie Lull. Mr. Schlantin, do you think this disaster could lead to some sort of political reform in the country?
It is the people, expecting it, because of failure of military regimes to distribute the effective distribution of these emergency aid they need. So people are expecting that international community will be able to help them out from those human tragedy.
Mr. Holmes, do you think that receiving this aid will require a new degree of cooperation with other governments, with the UN, for example?
Well, I think it does require, in order to distribute aid effectively, a degree of openness which is not natural to this regime, to put it at no higher than that. So they do need to accept that some international workers will need to come in, international humanitarian workers. Their only motive is to help the distribution of aid. They have no other political agenda. They don't want to get involved in the referendum or whatever else it might be. They simply want to help people, and they're not going to stay forever. They will stay as long as they're desperately needed, and then they will be very happy to move on. So I think it requires a change of attitude, but it should be one which is possible given the desperate circumstances of so many people of Myanmar we see on our television screens today.
Okay, let's pick up with that constitutional referendum. Mr. Schlantin, it's going to go ahead despite this disaster. How is that news being received in the country?
Well, at this point, people cannot directly receive all the international response and how the international aid package are delivering, but practically they are facing with a few aids have been distributing, but not enough, and they are very concerning because as the death toll and missing numbers are increasing day to day.
Ms. Lull, staying with this referendum, which will ultimately entrench the military regime, I mean, how much of a concern is that to Myanmar's neighbours?
Are you talking specifically about the referendum? I think the referendum is not a concern to Myanmar's neighbours at all. Myanmar's neighbours are concerned with a stable Myanmar, and what has destabilized Myanmar is the cyclone. So at the moment, it's not even clear in how far it's going to be able to go ahead. I understand that it's been postponed to the 24th of May and possibly beyond that in all the cyclone-affected areas. And it's only the areas totally not affected by the cyclone which are going to go towards a vote. But as such, the referendum is seen as one which is going to lead to a level of power sharing between the military and the first civilian representatives, and a first step in the right direction. That's a very regional view. It's not a view shared by the Western governments, but it's a view shared by China, India, and the ASEAN states, who understand that this is the first step of change for Myanmar.
Because the ASEAN countries will be meeting in July, do you think they will use this opportunity to push for change?
ASEAN has a policy of non-interference, which is one of the reasons that you have a variety of types of governments, including, for example, the Communist government of Vietnam as part of ASEAN. So ASEAN will not directly push for change in that particular direction. What we have a misunderstanding in the West that we think that this constitutional referendum is about democracy. It's nothing to do with democracy. It's about the military taking a small step back from being the governing regime and allowing some level of power sharing as a first step of change in Myanmar. If there were to be a no vote, in this particular case, I don't know where that would leave the country, but it would possibly be more of the same of what we've had for the last 20 years.
Mr. Holmes, the military regime has a direct impact on the humanitarian crisis. Outside this issue that's happening at the moment, what role do you see for the UN going forward?
Well, the UN has been trying to play a political role since the unrest of last year through the role of Ibrahim Gambari, representing the Secretary-General's good offices to try to bring the different sides together. And that's been a very frustrating process as well. Beyond that, on the humanitarian side, our concern is always, well before the cyclone, we've been giving humanitarian help in different parts of Myanmar. And again, we try to make sure that's completely separate from any other kind of political agenda. We're simply trying to help those in need, irrespective of their politics or their religion.
The UN seemed to open up some sort of idea of dialogue with the opposition. Do you think that is the key to leading to any reform within the country?
That should be addressed to me. And I'm concerned essentially to get the humanitarian aid in both before the cyclone, but more particularly in the desperately urgent circumstances now, to get the aid in now. Now, quite what the political way forward is for Myanmar is not really for me to say, and I don't think it's helpful for me to go into it.
Of course. Mr. Shlata, I mean, the opposition at the moment, we know that Aung San Suu Kyi, the most well-known and powerful opposition leader, is still incarcerated in her home. How big is the opposition at the moment, and what role do you think they will have after this disaster?
Oh, well, it is, you know, disaster is one hand, but the military they continue according to their political agenda to finish their so-called national, the national referendum. If the national referendum is achieved in their own way, the Aung San Suu Kyi will be out of political picture from Burma. And it is very uncertain that our party, the National League for Democracy, will be, whether it will be allowed in the future election or not.
Mrs. Lowell, instead of trying to enforce change, shouldn't the government rather be seen as doing something to strengthen civil society in the country?
The civil society is actually, I wouldn't say flourishing in the country, it certainly isn't, but there is a level of civil society which, again, is not unreported, specifically religious-based civil society and also ethnic group civil society groups. People are active in civil society. I think we have an incredible opportunity here with this cyclone, whereby with aid flowing into the country to strengthen civil society in Myanmar. I don't think that the Myanmar government sees it as its duty at all to strengthen civil society. I think we should see this as an opportunity to be able to do this through the aid which is going to come into the country.
But Mr. Holmes, politics aside, I mean, the country now is facing a humanitarian disaster that's almost impossible to predict.
I think it is. I think it's, as I say, it's already a disaster. I've called it a catastrophe, and that's what it is. We need to make sure we avoid a second catastrophe, which comes from not providing the aid we can provide, even despite all the physical difficulties, through lack of cooperation. So that's my strong appeal to the government of Myanmar and the authorities in Myanmar. Please step up your own aid effort and allow us to do our job as well.
OK, let's leave it there. In New York, John Holmes from the UN. In Washington, Boslan Ta, spokesperson for the Burmese government in exile. And in London, Marie Lull, thank you very much for contributing to this Inside Story. And of course, we appreciate your views. Please email them to us on insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now, and thank you very much for watching.